Mira didn't flinch when the preacher read the final words of the ceremony, because there was no groom standing beside her. The chapel pews, mostly empty, held only curious eyes, and one old woman knitting in the back. Mira's hands were folded over her waist, her white dress borrowed and wrinkled, and the veil someone had pinned in place kept slipping to one side. At 29, she was what folks called a waist of fine cheekbones, a barren bride, proven twice over by 2 miscarriages, and a husband who'd died before the second one had even passed. She'd spent 3 years living with his bitter sister on a cracked ranch, where the goats were louder than the prayers and the shame louder still. When a distant cousin sent word that a widowed rancher was asking for a housekeeper, nothing more, Mira packed her few belongings and arrived 3 towns over, only to be handed a dress and told there would be a wedding. "It's just formality," the man had said. Ben Carver, tall, scarred, not cruel, but clearly worn by life. "The county don't like women on ranches unless they're wives." So she stood there alone, a bride in a fake ceremony for a man she'd barely met, with no music, no kiss, just a legal name change and a handshake. When it was done, Ben walked up, tipped his hat, and said, "Wagon's out back." No apologies, no promises. Just like that, Mira became Mrs. Carver, in name if nothing else. On the ride back, the sun was hot and the wind dry. She said nothing, and neither did he. But when they reached the ranch and 6 children ran out, muddy, barefoot, and wild-eyed, she understood what he hadn't said, that this wasn't about a housekeeper or a wife. It was about filling a space his dead wife had left behind, about giving these children someone who wasn't grieving so hard. She disappeared. Mira stood there, surrounded by strangers, a ringless bride with empty arms and a heart that had learned not to hope. But one of the girls, a tiny thing with curls like wildfire, tugged her sleeve and asked, "Are you the new mama?" Mira opened her mouth to explain, to say no, but what came out instead was, "I suppose I am." And in that quiet moment, with the children circling her like she was something solid, Mira felt the first stir of something dangerous, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. It wasn't joy. It was possibility. The Carver ranch wasn't much to look at. 3 crooked fences, a barn that leaned like an old man, and a house that had clearly been patched more times than prayed over. But it held something Mira hadn't seen in a long while. Motion, life, noise. The 6 children ranged from barely walking to almost grown, and each one stared at her with a mix of curiosity and quiet, hard-earned distrust. Ben didn't explain their names, didn't explain much at all. He just unloaded the wagon, handed her a crate of dry goods, and said, "Kitchen's yours." That was all. Then he walked off to the far field, his broad back disappearing into the waist-high grass. Mira stood in the dusty yard, groceries still in hand, unsure if she was supposed to cook for 7 or if this was some kind of test. By dusk, she'd found enough in the pantry to bake cornbread and boil beans. She set the table with mismatched plates and dented forks. The children came in without a word, as if called by some silent dinner bell, and sat. She served them, one by one, expecting someone to complain, but none of them did. Only the eldest boy, maybe 13, met her eyes and asked, "You cook like this every day?" Mira froze. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? He shrugged, then tore off a piece of bread. Better than cold bacon and dry oats? They ate in silence, and Mira ate last. Only once everyone's bowl was empty did Ben return, dusty and silent, hat in hand. He nodded at her and sat at the edge of the table like a guest in his own home. "They like you," he said, not as a compliment, but as fact. Mira didn't answer. She just watched him take the last of the bread and chew like it hurt to swallow. He didn't ask her how her day went. He didn't thank her. But before he turned in for the night, he paused at the door and said, I didn't marry you for me, I married you for them." Then he walked out, leaving her with the dishes and a silence thicker than sorrow. And yet, as she scrubbed the pots and wiped the counter, Mira felt something she hadn't in years. Use. Not as a burden, not as a problem to solve. Just needed. And for a barren bride with no children to claim, that was more than she dared hope for. By the third morning, Mira had learned that the youngest, Lucy, cried before breakfast if she didn't get the blue tin cup, that the twins wouldn't eat unless their food was plated the same, and that the eldest, Caleb, watched everything, always from a few steps away, like he was waiting for her to mess up and vanish. She didn't blame him. She'd done the same with every stranger who'd passed through her own childhood door. Ben left early, returned late, and spoke even less than before. Once, Mira saw him pause at the gate, watching her through the barn slats as she showed the littlest how to braid rope from hay scraps. But when she turned to wave, he was already gone. That afternoon, a neighbor woman stopped by, bustling, blonde, a little too cheerful, and made a show of bringing peaches for the orphans. Her eyes scanned Mira, her dress, her ringless finger. "I thought he said you was married." Mira smiled thinly. "He did, and we are." The woman raised a brow. "Well, we all expected someone younger, maybe with experience." Mira let that sit in the silence, then said, "I've had loss. I've had hope die on me more than once. That's experience enough for this house." When the woman left, Mira found Caleb watching from the doorway. "You could leave," he said quietly. "We've had women leave before." Mira knelt in front of him, looked him in the eyes. "I know what it's like to be left. I won't do that to you." He blinked, unsure, then muttered, "That's what the last one said." Mira didn't try to argue. She just said, "Then I'll be the first one who means it." That night, after the others were asleep, she stepped out onto the porch. Ben was there, sitting on the top step, arms resting on his knees. "I heard what you said," he murmured. Mira didn't answer. The wind picked up. "I never meant to bring you here to test you," he said. "I just didn't know what else to do." Mira sat beside him, not too close. "I didn't come to be tested, Ben. I came because no one else saw me, and you did." He didn't reach for her hand, didn't speak, but he stayed beside her long after the stars came out. And when the wind cooled the porch boards, Mira whispered, "Maybe they've been left before, but I wasn't given away. I chose this." And something about the quiet that followed felt like the beginning of a promise. By the time a week had passed, Mira knew every squeaky floorboard in the farmhouse and could read the moods of each child by the way their boots hit the steps. She had stitched torn shirts, soothed fevers, taught Lucy how to tie a ribbon, and still hadn't had more than 5 words from Ben in a row. But something was shifting. The morning chores were no longer silent. The children started asking questions about her old home, about whether she'd ever had a dog. Caleb even offered to help gather eggs without being told. And one evening, without fanfare, Ben brought home a second-hand chair and set it at the dinner table, between his seat and Mira's. "It was missing," he said simply. She didn't ask if he meant the chair or something more. That night, as they all sat down, Lucy climbed into Mira's lap instead of her usual chair. Mira hesitated. The girl looked up. "Is this okay?" Mira smoothed her hair. "Of course." Halfway through dinner, Caleb spoke without prompting. "You cook better than Mrs. Elsie. She always burned the meat." The twins nodded, mouths full. Mira smiled, biting back tears. It was a mess of a dinner. Someone knocked over the milk, and the dog got hold of a biscuit. But when Ben looked up, catching her eye across the table, something passed between them. Not gratitude, not obligation. something gentler. After the meal, while Mira cleared dishes, Ben lingered at the door. "You belong here," he said quietly. "I just didn't know how to say it." Mira turned to face him. "You don't have to say it, but if you mean it, don't run from this." He nodded, a rough motion that came from deep in the chest. "I'm trying." "So am I." She took a step forward. "But I need to know something." He tilted his head. "What's that?" "That this isn't just survival for you. That this could be something real." Ben swallowed hard, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Then, after a long silence, he said, "It already is. I just didn't know if I deserved to say it." Mira didn't answer. She didn't need to. The way she looked at him said everything. And for the first time since they'd met, Ben didn't walk away. He stayed, holding her gaze like a man who finally saw not just a helper or a name on a legal document, but a woman who had quietly built herself into the heart of a home. It had been the best day yet. Mira had baked cornbread that didn't crumble, and the boys had returned from the ridge with 2 fat hares, grinning like they'd won a prize. Even Ben had come in early, boots muddy and shirt clinging from sweat, but his face lighter than it had been in months. They ate together by lantern light, laughter spilling between bites. Mira couldn't remember the last time she'd felt full, not just in her belly, but in her chest. The table was crowded, noisy, alive, and then came the knock. Not a soft, neighborly tap, but a hard, deliberate pound that sent every spoon to stillness. Ben stood first, his hand resting near the rifle by the door, and when he opened it, a tall man in a duster coat stepped in like he owned the place. Behind him stood 2 others, equally rough. "Evenin'," the man said, looking past Ben and straight at Mira. "Heard the widow was taken in boarders. Didn't figure she'd be married again so quick." Ben's jaw clenched. "This is my wife, state papers and all." The man smirked. "Didn't say she wasn't. Just said she's got a reputation for being empty where it counts. Wasn't that why her last one left?" Mira's spine stiffened. Lucy reached for her hand. "Ben," she whispered, but he didn't move. Not yet. "You want something?" Ben asked, voice low. "Just passing through," the man said. "Thought we'd say hello to the new lady of the house. Maybe see if she's as sweet as the rumors." Mira stood then, stepping forward before Ben could. Her voice shook, but only a little. "You've said enough. Leave, now." The man's eyes narrowed. "You threatening me, barren bride?" And that did it. Ben moved faster than she'd ever seen him, grabbing the man by the collar and shoving him out the door in one motion. "You talk that way again in front of my kids or my wife, and you'll be picking your teeth out of the dirt," he growled. The others didn't follow. They backed away, muttering. When the door slammed shut, the silence inside was deafening. Caleb was standing now. Lucy was crying. Ben turned, still trembling, but Mira walked to him and placed a hand on his chest. "You didn't have to—" "Yes," he said, voice hoarse. "I did." And in that moment, with every child watching, he pulled her into his arms, not because she needed saving, but because she already was his, fully, fiercely, without apology. The next morning, everything felt different. Ben rose before the sun, as usual, but Mira found him standing by the gate instead of the barn, staring out toward the east fields like he was trying to solve something. She approached quietly, arms crossed against the dawn chill. "You didn't sleep." He didn't look at her, just nodded. "I kept thinking, about what they said, about you." Mira stiffened, but he turned to her before she could answer, and his voice was steadier than it had been all night. "I should have said it sooner. I don't care if we never have a child of our own. I already have everything I ever needed, because I have you." Her breath caught. He didn't say it with pity, or as a compromise, but like it was a vow. Before she could reply, the screen door creaked behind them, and 6 little feet came stomping down the steps. Caleb, then Lucy, then Sam, with bed hair and bickering and sleep-wrinkled clothes. "She burned the biscuits again," Sam cried. "Only a little," Lucy defended. Mira smiled, stepping between them with practiced calm. But Ben kept watching her, watching them. Then, all at once, he turned and called back to the porch. "Everybody come here a second." The rest of the children filtered out, some still rubbing sleep from their eyes. Ben cleared his throat, shifted on his boots. "I've been thinking. Y'all have known Mira for some time now, and I've seen the way you look at her when you're sick or scared or just need someone to tell you everything'll be okay. I ain't ever asked if it was all right with you, me marrying her, but I need to ask something now." Mira blinked. Ben turned to the children, his voice soft but sure. "Would it be all right if we stopped calling her Miss Mira or Ma'am and started calling her Mama?" Silence. Then Lucy stepped forward, her small voice trembling. "Can I really?" Mira knelt, barely holding back tears. "If you want to." Lucy nodded. Then Caleb. Then even Grumpy Sam mumbled, "Mama sounds better anyway." Mira covered her mouth with both hands. Ben helped her stand, whispering, "They chose you, just like I did." And as she held their hands, these 6 orphaned hearts who had slowly made room for her, she realized that the word she'd once thought she'd never hear again wasn't a loss anymore. It was a promise, a beginning, a name finally earned. The knock came just past noon, while Mira was brushing Lucy's hair and humming some half-remembered lullaby. Ben answered the door, expecting the feed delivery, but instead found a man in a stiff gray suit holding a folded telegram and a small parcel. "Benjamin Cartwright?" the man asked, adjusting his spectacles. "Yes, sir," Ben replied, warily. The man nodded and handed over the envelope. "Legal affairs out of Abilene. Found something tied to your late brother's estate." Ben's brow furrowed. He took the package and thanked him, then closed the door with care. Mira came down, sensing his unease. "Everything all right?" Ben sat slowly at the kitchen table, unwrapped the parcel, and inside found 2 things: a deed and a letter. It was penned in his brother Nathan's handwriting, dated over a year ago, and addressed to whoever he trusts most. Mira leaned in, reading it aloud. "I always knew I wouldn't live long. Never was built for peace. But if this land ever gets handed down, I want it to go to someone who understands that family isn't blood. It's who you stay for when things get hard." Her voice caught, and she looked up at Ben. "He meant you." Ben swallowed. "And us." The deed confirmed it. 60 acres along the South Ridge, fertile and untouched. A future no one had counted on. The children crowded in, wide-eyed as Ben explained. "It's ours now. We can build there. Start again." Mira smiled, then hesitated. "Do you want to?" Ben turned to her, his eyes shining. "Only if you're beside me." But the gift came with more than land. Inside the envelope was a small photograph, faded but clear. It was of a woman, not Mira, holding an infant in front of the old homestead. Ben turned it over. "To the woman I never stopped loving. If you find this, tell our son his father was sorry." A silence fell. Ben stared at the image, stunned. "He had a child?" Mira leaned in. "That means there's someone else, maybe nearby." The mystery pulled at her heart. Another orphan, perhaps. Another soul in need. Ben looked at her and said, "We find them. We offer them the same thing you offered us." And for Mira, that sealed it. Their family wasn't finished growing yet. It had only just begun. They didn't have to search long. 2 days later, while clearing brush near the edge of the new land, little Jonah came running back from the ridge, shouting, There's someone in the trees! Ben grabbed his rifle out of habit, but Mira placed a hand on his arm. Let's go gently. Together they crossed the clearing, following the boys' excited tracks through the tall grass until they reached a small apple grove long gone wild. And there, beneath the overhang of tangled branches, sat a girl, no older than 10, barefoot and holding a rusty tin plate, licking the last of some stolen peaches. Her dress was torn, her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes were fierce and bright. "Who are you?" Ben asked softly, crouching low. She tensed, clutching the plate like a weapon. "You ain't the law, are you?" Mira shook her head gently. "No, sweetheart. We're not the law. We're just neighbors." The girl looked between them, uncertain. "This land ain't had neighbors in years." Mira stepped forward slowly. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, then muttered, "Josie." "Mama called me Josie." Ben exchanged a glance with Mira. "Did your mama ever mention a man named Nathan Cartwright?" Josie's jaw tightened. "He came once, brought money, then he stopped. Mama said he died and we weren't supposed to talk about it." Her chin trembled, but she didn't cry. "She passed last winter. I stayed because I didn't want to end up in the house with the drunks and beaters." Mira knelt beside her, her voice low. "You're his daughter, aren't you?" Josie's eyes flicked up. "You knew him?" Mira nodded. "He gave us this land, and he left something behind, something for you, too." For the first time, the girl's face softened. She whispered, "I don't want anything. I just want someone to stop leaving." Mira reached out, took the girl's dirt-streaked hand, and squeezed it. "Then you found the right place." By the time the sun dipped low, Josie sat between Jonah and Lucy on the porch, chewing biscuits and staring at the hills. No one asked her to stay, but no one needed to. She already had. And Mira knew, deep in her chest, that Nathan's story wasn't ending in shame. It was being rewritten, in quiet hands and second chances. The news of Josie's presence spread faster than wildfire. A child from the Cartwright line, living on Mira and Ben's ranch, was too scandalous for town gossip to ignore. The preacher's wife whispered it during prayer. The storekeeper mentioned it with raised brows. And by Saturday, Sheriff Dunley himself rode up the trail, not alone, but flanked by 2 men from the county office. Mira stepped out to meet them, Josie peeking from behind the door, fists clenched. "We heard there's an orphan girl here," Dunley said, his tone neutral, but his eyes searching. "You know the law. Children can't be left in backwoods custody." Ben's jaw tightened, but Mira stepped forward. "She's not in custody. She's in family." One of the county men, slick hair, big boots, laughed. "Ma'am, that ain't how it works." Mira motioned to Josie, who stepped out slowly, eyes steady. "You want to take her? Ask her yourself." Josie didn't flinch. "You'll have to drag me, and I bite." The sheriff cleared his throat awkwardly. "Now hold on. Maybe there's a solution here. We could get her on a list, put her in the system." Ben's voice cut through. "I saw that system. My sister ended up worse off than dead in it." Mira's voice was softer, but just as firm. "If the law wants to question how a barren woman became a mother, let them. But they better be ready to explain why they'd rather steal a child from kindness than leave her where she's safe." The men looked at one another, uncertain now. Dunley finally muttered, "No harm's come to her. That's something. We'll review the case." And they turned back, the wind taking their threats with them. That night, Josie sat under the stars, head on Mira's lap, and asked, "Was my mama bad for lying?" Mira stroked her hair. "No, sweetheart. She was scared. But you don't have to lie to be loved anymore." And Josie nodded, drifting to sleep as Ben lit the lanterns around the porch like he always did, one for every child that might one day find their way home. Spring arrived like a secret. Soft at first, then impossible to ignore. Josie had learned to ride bareback by then, her giggles echoing across the pasture, while Mira mended shirts too big for her yet. Ben had built her a small shelf of books by the window, and every morning, Josie read aloud while the sun poured in like forgiveness. No court ever came, no sheriff returned, not because they forgot, but because they saw what couldn't be undone. A girl who had once been abandoned now belonged somewhere. One Sunday morning, Josie asked if she could call Mira Mama, her voice cautious, hopeful. Mira froze, then gathered the girl into her arms and whispered, "Only if I can call you mine." And from then on, that's what they were. Not by blood, not by law, but by choice. One day, a woman from the nearby town came knocking, a widow with nowhere to go, and a boy too shy to speak. She'd heard about a ranch where broken things weren't thrown away. And Mira, without hesitation, said, "There's always room here." The table grew longer, the laughter louder. And Ben, quiet and steady, carved new initials into the barn post every time someone stayed. They never did get rich. The land never got easy. But something unshakable took root. Where once there had been silence and fences, now grew names and stories and second chances. Folks in town still whispered. But this time they called her the woman with 6 children and a husband who never stopped believing. And Mira, once barren and forgotten, stood at her porch each dusk with Josie's hand in hers, knowing that love, when planted in the hardest soil, grows deeper than anyone ever expects. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had stood on that porch, would you have let her stay too? Tell us in the comments.